Welcome, Autograph Fisherman here, and this is Remember That Show, where I pick a show from our past and do a bio on it. This is the last Thursday of the month, so it is movie week, and this week it will be The Shining. The Shining is a 1980 psychological horror film produced and directed by Stanley Kubrick and co-written with novelist Diane Johnson. It is based on Stephen King's 1977 novel and stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd, and Scatman Crothers. The film presents a descent into insanity of a recovering alcoholic and aspiring novelist Nicholson, who takes a job as winter caretaker for a mountain resort hotel with his wife Duvall and clairvoyant son Lloyd. Production took place almost exclusively in England at EMI Elstree Studios, with sets based on real locations. Kubrick often worked with a small crew, which allowed him to do many takes, sometimes to the exhaustion of the actors and staff. The then-new Steadicam mount was used to shoot several scenes, giving the film an innovative and immersive look and feel. The film was released in the United States on May 23, 1980 by Warner Brothers, and in the United Kingdom on October 2nd by Columbia Pictures through Columbia EMI Warner Distributors. There were several versions for theatrical releases, each of which was cut shorter than the preceding cut. About 27 minutes was cut in total. Reactions to the film at the time of its release were mixed. King criticized the film due to its deviations from the novel. The film received two controversial nominations at the first Golden Raspberry Awards in 1981, Worst Director and Worst Actress, the latter which was later rescinded in 2022 due to Kubrick's alleged treatment of Duvall on set. The film has since been critically reappraised and is now often cited as one of the best horror films and one of the greatest films of all time. The film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant in 2018. A sequel titled Dr. Sleep, based on King's 2013 novel of the same name, was adapted to film and released in 2019. Jack Torrance takes a winter caretaker position at the remote Overlook Hotel in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, which closes every winter season. After his arrival, hotel manager Stuart Ullman informs Jack that a previous caretaker, Charles Grady, killed his wife, two young daughters, and himself in the hotel a decade prior. In Boulder, Jack's son, Danny, has a premonition and seizure. Jack's wife, Wendy, tells the doctor about a past incident when Jack accidentally dislocated Danny's shoulder during a drunken rage. Jack has been sober ever since. Before leaving for the seasonal break, the Overlook's head chef, Dick Halloran, informs Danny of a telepathic ability the two share, which his grandmother called shining. Halloran tells Danny that the hotel also shines due to residue from unpleasant past events and warns him to avoid room 237. A month passes, and Danny starts having frightening visions, including of the murdered Grady twins. Meanwhile, Jack's mental health deteriorates. He suffers from writer's block, is prone to violent outbursts, and has dreams of killing his family. Danny gets lured to room 237 by unseen forces, and Wendy later finds it with signs of physical trauma for which she blames Jack. Jack sulks in the ballroom, where ghostly bartender Lloyd entices him back to drinking. Wendy tells him that Danny was attacked by a crazy woman in room 237. Jack investigates and encounters a hideous female ghost in the bathroom, but tells Wendy he saw nothing. He blames Danny for inflicting the bruises on himself and reacts angrily when Wendy suggests leaving the hotel. Danny enters a trance and telepathically contacts Halloran. Returning to the ballroom, Jack finds it filled with ghostly figures, including waiter Delbert Grady, who urges Jack to correct his wife and child. When he finds Jack's manuscript written with nothing but countless repetitions of the proverb, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. When Jack threatens her life, when he knocks him unconscious with a baseball bat and locks him in the kitchen pantry, but she and Danny cannot leave because Jack previously sabotaged the hotel's two-way radio and snowcat. Back in their hotel room, Danny says Redrum repeatedly and writes the word in lipstick on the bathroom door. Wendy sees a word in the mirror and realizes that it is actually murder spelled backward. Jack is freed by Grady and goes after Wendy and Danny with an axe. Danny escapes outside to the bathroom window, and Wendy fights Jack off with a knife when he tries to break through the door. Halloran, having flown back to Colorado from his Florida winter home, reaches the hotel in another snowcat. His arrival distracts Jack, who ambushes and murders him with the axe in the lobby, then pursues Danny into the hedge maze. Wendy runs to the hotel looking for Danny, encountering the hotel's ghost, Halloran's bloody corpse, and a vision of cascading blood from an elevator similar to Danny's premonition. In the hedge maze, Danny carefully backtracks to mislead Jack and hides behind a snowdrift. Jack plunges onward without a trail and becomes lost. Danny and Wendy reunite and leave in Halloran's snowcat, leaving Jack to freeze to death in the maze. In the film's last shot, a photograph in the hotel hallway pictures Jack standing amidst a crowd of party revelers from July 4th, 1921. Cast: Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Doc Torrance, Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, Barry Nelson as Stuart Ullman, Philip Stone as Delbert Grady, Joe Turkel as Lloyd, and Jackson as Doctor, Tony Burton as Larry Durkin, Leah Beldamda as Young Woman in Bath, Billy Gibson as Old Woman in Bath, Barry Denon as Bill Watson, Lisa and Louise Burns as the Grady twins. In the European cut, all of the scenes involving Jackson and Burton were removed, but the credits remained unchanged. Denon is on screen in all versions of the film, albeit to a limited degree and with no dialogue, in the European cut. The actresses who played the ghosts of the murdered Grady daughters, Lisa and Louise Burns, are identical twins. The characters in the book and film script are sisters, not twins. In the film's dialogue, Ullman says that he thinks that they were about 8 and 10. Nonetheless, they are frequently referred to in discussions about the film as the Grady twins. There is a resemblance in the staging of the Grady girls and the identical twins, Roselle, New Jersey, 1967 photograph by Diane Arbus, according to Arbus biographer Patricia Bosworth, the Kubrick assistant who cast and coached them, Leon Vitali, and by numerous Kubrick critics. Kubrick both met Arbus personally and studied photography under her during his time as photographer for Look magazine. Kubrick's widow says he did not deliberately model the Grady girls on Arbus' photograph, in spite of widespread attention to the resemblance. Film critic Jonathan Romney writes that the film has been interpreted in many ways, including addressing the topics of the crisis in masculinity, sexism, corporate America, and racism. It's tempting to read The Shining as an Oedipal struggle not just between generations, but between Jack's culture of the written word and Danny's culture of images, Romney writes. Jack also uses a written word to more mundane purpose, to sign his contract with the Overlook. I gave my word, which we take to mean gave his soul in the Faustian sense. But maybe he means it more literally, by the end. He has renounced language entirely, pursuing Danny through the maze with an inarticulate animal roar. What is entered into is a conventional business deal that places commercial obligation over the unspoken contract of compassion and empathy that he seems to have neglected to sign with his family. Among interpreters who see the film reflecting more subtly the social concerns that animate other Kubrick films, one of the early viewpoints was discussed in an essay by ABC reporter Bill Blakemore titled Kubrick's Shining Secret. Films in Horror is The Murder of the Indian, first published in the Washington Post on July 12, 1987. He believes that indirect references to American killings of Native Americans pervade the film, as exemplified by the Amerindian logos on the baking powder in the kitchen and the Amerindian artwork that appears throughout the hotel, though no Native Americans are seen. Stuart Ullman tells Wendy that when building the hotel, a few Indian attacks had to be fended off since it was constructed on an Indian burial ground. Blakemore's general argument is that the film is a metaphor for the genocide of Native Americans. He notes that when Jack kills Halloran, the dead body is seen lying on a rug with an Indian motif. The blood in the elevator shafts is, for Blakemore, the blood of the Indians in the burial ground on which the hotel was built. The date of the final photograph, July 4th, is meant to be ironic. Blakemore writes, as with some of his other movies, Kubrick ends The Shining with a powerful visual puzzle that forces the audience to leave the theater asking, what was that all about? The Shining ends with an extremely long camera shot moving down a hallway in the Overlook, reaching eventually the central photo among 21 photos on the wall, each capturing previous good times in the hotel. At the head of the party is none other than the Jack we've just seen in 1980. The caption reads, Overlook Hotel, July 4th Ball, 1921. The answer to this puzzle, which is a master key to unlocking the whole movie, is that most Americans overlook the fact that July 4th was no ball, nor any kind of Independence Day for Native Americans, that the weak American villain of the film is the re-embodiment of the American men who massacred the Indians in earlier years, that Kubrick is examining and reflecting on a problem that cuts through the decades and centuries. Film writer John Capo sees the film as an allegory of American imperialism. This is exemplified by many clues, such as the closing photo of Jack in the past at a 4th of July party, or Jack's earlier reference to the Rudyard Kipling poem, The White Man's Burden, which was written to advocate the American colonial siege of the Philippine Islands, justifying imperial conquest as a mission of civilization. The artwork of indigenous Canadian artist Norval Morrisseau can be seen throughout the film, including the paintings of Great Earth Mother, 1976, and Flock of Loons, 1975. Film historian Jeffrey Cox has extended Blakemore's idea that the film has a subtext about Native Americans by arguing that the film indirectly reflects Stanley Kubrick's concerns about the Holocaust. Both Cox's book and Michael Hare's memoir of Kubrick discuss how he wanted his entire life to make a film dealing directly with the Holocaust, but could never quite make up his mind. Cox, writing in his book The Wolf at the Door, Stanley Kubrick, History and Holocaust, proposed a controversial theory that all of Kubrick's work is informed by the Holocaust. There is, he says, a Holocaust subtext in The Shining. This, Cox believes, is why Kubrick's screenplay goes to emotional extremes, omitting much of the novel's supernaturalism and making character of Wendy much more hysteria-prone. Cox places Kubrick's vision of a haunted hotel in line with a long literary tradition of hotels in which sinister events occur, from Stephen Crane's short story The Blue Hotel, which Kubrick admired, to the Swiss Berghof in Thomas Mann's novel The Magic Mountain, about a snowbound sanatorium high in the Swiss Alps in which the protagonist witnesses a series of events which are a microcosm of the decline of Western culture. Cox claims that Kubrick has elaborately coded many of his historical concerns into the film with manipulations of numbers and colors and his choice of musical numbers, many of which are post-war compositions influenced by the horrors of World War II. Of particular note is Kubrick's use of Christoph Penderecki's The Awakening of Jacob to accompany Jack Torrance's dream of killing his family, and Danny's vision of past carnage in the hotel, a piece of music originally associated with the horrors of the Holocaust. Cox's work has been anthologized and discussed in other works on Stanley Kubrick films, though sometimes with skepticism. Julian Rice, writing in the opening chapter of his book Kubrick's Hope, believes Cox's views are excessively speculative and contain too many strained critical leaps of faith. Rice holds that what went on in Kubrick's mind cannot be replicated or corroborated beyond a broad vision of the nature of good and evil, which include a concern about the Holocaust. But Kubrick's art is not governed by this one obsession. Diane Johnson, co-screenwriter for The Shining, commented on Cox's observations, saying that preoccupation with the Holocaust on Kubrick's part could very likely have motivated his decision to place the hotel on a Native American burial ground, although Kubrick never directly mentioned it to her. Jeffrey Cox notes that the film contains many allusions to fairy tales, both Hansel and Gretel, and the three little pigs with Jack Torrance identified as the Big Bad Wolf, which Bruno Bettelheim interprets as standing for all the social unconscious devouring powers that must be overcome by a child's ego. The saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, appeared first in James Howells Proverbs in English, Italian, French, and Spanish, 1659. Numerous paintings and sculptures appear throughout the film. Several paintings by a group of 7 artists appear, including The Solemn Land, 1921, by J. E. H. McDonald, Northern River, 1914, by Tom Thomson, Stormy Weather, Georgian Bay, 1921, by Frederick Varley, Red Maple, 1914, by A. Y. Jackson, Miss Fantasy, Sand River, Algoma, 1920, by J. H. McDonald, Maligney Lake, Jasper Park, 1924, by Lauren Harris, Beaver Swamp, 1920, by Lauren Harris, and Arpeggio, 1932, by Frederick Varley. 2 paintings by indigenous Canadian artist Norval Morrisseau can be seen in the film: The Great Earth Mother, 1976, and Flock of Loons, 1975. Morrisseau was part of Professional Native Indian Artists Incorporated PNII, which came to be informally known as the Indian Group of 7. Many of the paintings that appear include depictions of Canada or are painted by Canadian artists, including Le Campement du Trepas, 1931, by Clarence Gagnon, December Afternoon, 1969, by Hugh Monaghan, Log Hut on the St. Maurice, 1862, and Pays de Hiver, Laval, 1849, by Cornelius Krieghoff, After the Bath, 1890, by Paul Peel, Site Due, Combat de la Grange, September 25, 1775, 1839, by Louise Amelie Panet, Starlight, Indian Papoose and Chief Bear Paw by Nicolas Raphael de Grand Maison, Montreal from the Mountain, 1838, by William Henry Bartlett, Makar returning in their war canoes, 1845 to 1859, by Paul Kane, Mill on the Cliff by Nicholas Horniansky, The Johnson House, Hanover, 1932-42, by Carl Schaefer and Cooper's Hawk, 1974, and Glaucus Winged Gull, 1973, by J. Fenwick Lansdowne. A number of paintings by Alex Colville make appearances, including Woman and Terrier, 1963, Horse and Train, 1954, Hound and Field, 1958, Dog, Boy, and St. John River, 1958, and Moon and Cow, 1963. Several portraits by Dorothy Oxborough of children from the Bear's Paw Band of the Stony/Nakota people appear in the film. Oxborough's portraits were often reproduced as decorative prints, framed souvenirs, greeting cards, novelties, and calendars. Oxborough, born in Calgary, Alberta, was criticized for infantilizing and culturally insensitive depictions of indigenous people. For etchings by John Weber appear in the film, A Man of Nootka Sound, 1778, A Woman of Unalaska, 1784, A Woman of Prince William Sound, 1784, and A Man of Van Diemen's Land, 1777. Weber accompanied James Cook on his third voyage to Hawaii, New Zealand, and Vancouver Island. Roger Ebert notes that the film does not really have a reliable observer, with the possible exception of Dick Aloran. Ebert believes various events call into question the reliability of Jack, Wendy, and Danny. This leads Ebert to conclude that Kubrick is telling a story with ghosts, the two girls, the former caretaker and a bartender. But it isn't a ghost story, because the ghosts may not be present in any sense at all except as visions experienced by Jack or Danny. Ebert concludes that the movie is not about ghosts, but about madness and the energies it sets loose in an isolated situation primed to magnify them. The film critic James Berardinelli notes that King would have us believe that the hotel is haunted. Kubrick is less definitive in the interpretations he offers. He dubs the film a failure as a ghost story, but brilliant as a study of madness and the unreliable narrator. In some sequences, there's a question of whether or not there are ghosts present. In the scenes where Jack sees ghosts, he is always facing a mirror or, in the case of his storeroom conversation with Grady, a reflective, highly polished door. Film reviewer James Berardinelli notes, "It has been pointed out that there's a mirror in every scene in which Jack sees a ghost, causing us to wonder whether the spirits are reflections of a tortured psyche." In Hollywood, Stephen King, Tony Magistrale wrote, Kubrick's reliance on mirrors as visual aids for underscoring the thematic meaning of this film portrays visually the internal transformations and oppositions that are occurring to Jack Torrance psychologically. Through these devices, Kubrick dramatizes the hotel's methodical assault on Torrance's identity, its ability to stimulate the myriad of self-doubts and anxieties by creating opportunities to warp Torrance's perspective on himself and his family. Furthermore, the fact that Jack looks into a mirror whenever he speaks to the hotel means, to some extent, that Kubrick implicates him directly into the hotel's consciousness, because Jack is, in effect, talking to himself. Ghosts are the implied explanation for Jack's seemingly physically impossible escape from the locked storeroom. In an interview of Kubrick by scholar Michel Simon, the director made comment about the scene in the book that may imply he similarly thought of the scene in the film as a key reveal in this dichotomy. It seemed to strike an extraordinary balance between the psychological and the supernatural in such a way as to lead you to think that the supernatural would eventually be explained by the psychological. Jack must be imagining these things because he's crazy. This allowed you to suspend your doubt of the supernatural until you were so thoroughly into the story that you could accept it almost without noticing. It's not until Grady, the ghost of the former caretaker who acts to death his family, slides open the bolt of the larder door, allowing Jack to escape, that you are left with no other explanation but the supernatural. Early in the film, Stuart Ullman tells Jack of a previous caretaker, Charles Grady, who, in 1970, succumbed to cabin fever, murdered his family, and then killed himself. Later, Jack meets a ghostly butler named Grady. Jack says that he knows about the murders, claiming to recognize Grady from pictures, but the butler introduces himself as Delbert Grady. Gordon Dahlquist of the Kubrick FAQ argues that the name change deliberately mirrors Jack Torrance being both the husband of Wendy/father Danny and the mysterious man in the 1920s July 4th photo. It is to say he is two people, the man with choice in a perilous situation, and the man who has always been at the Overlook. It's a mistake to see the final photo as evidence that the events of the film are predetermined. Jack has any number of moments where he can act other than the way he does, and that is poor. Choices are fueled by weakness, and fear perhaps merely speaks all the more to the questions about the personal and the political that The Shining brings up. In the same way Charles had a chance, once more perhaps, to not take on Delbert's legacy, so Jack may have had a chance to escape his role as caretaker, to the interests of the powerful. It's the tragic course of this story that he chooses not to. Dahlquist's argument is that Delbert Grady, the 1920s butler, and Charles Grady, the 1970s caretaker, rather than being either two people or the same, are two manifestations of a similar entity, a part permanently at the Hotel Delbert, and a part which is given the choice of whether to join the legacy of the hotel's murderous past, Charles. Just as the man in the photo is not exactly Jack Torrance, but nor is he someone different. Jack in the photo has always been at the Overlook. Jack the caretaker chooses to become part of the hotel. The film's assistant editor Gordon Stainforth has commented on this issue, attempting to steer a course between the continuity error explanation on one side and the hidden meaning explanation on the other. I don't think we'll ever quite unravel this. Was his full name Charles Delbert Grady? Perhaps Charles was a sort of nickname? Perhaps Ullman got the name wrong? But I also think that Stanley did not want the whole story to fit together too neatly. So absolutely correct, I think, to say that the sum of what we learn refuses to add up neatly among Kubrick's other doubling/mirroring effects in the film. In the U.S. version, Jack's interview with Ullman, whose confident affability contrasts with Jack's seemingly forced nonchalance, is paired with Wendy's meeting with a female doctor, whose somber and professional manner contrasts with Wendy's nervousness. During the interview, Jack and Ullman are joined by a hotel employee named Bill Watson, who looks similar to Jack from behind, creating a pseudo-mirror image effect as they sit in chairs to the front left and front right of Ullman's desk. The Grady sisters look so similar that they appear to be twins, though they are different ages. Ullman states that he thinks that they were about 8 and 10. On 2 occasions, Ullman says goodbye to 2 young female employees, and in the second case, they closely resemble each other. The film contains 2 mazes, the hedges outside, and, per Wendy's characterization, the Overlook. The hedge maze appears in 2 forms, the 13-foot-high version outside and the model inside the Overlook. In the overhead shot zooming down on Wendy and Danny in the center of the maze, the maze differs from the map outside and from the model having far more corridors, and the left and right sides are mirror images of each other. The Overlook significantly breaks down into 2 sections, one old and one remodeled, one past, one present. 2 versions of the bathing woman inhabit room 237, in Halloran's Miami bedroom. 2 paintings showing similar nude black women are seen on opposite walls just before he experiences a shining. There appear to be 2 Jack Torrances, the one who goes mad and freezes to death in the present, and the one who appears in a 1921 photograph that hangs on the gold corridor wall inside the Overlook. The ending photograph has been described as iconic. The provenance of the original photo used in the ending shot was discovered in April 2025. Conspiracy theories about its source have been discussed since the release of The Shining. Identified on screen as a July 4th ball at the Overlook Hotel in 1921, the real event depicted was a Valentine's Day dance in 1921 at the Empress Rooms of the Royal Palace Hotel in Kensington, London. Jack Nicholson's face was airbrushed over that of John Gallman, who would later be a well-known ballroom dance instructor and author under the stage name Santos Cassani. In an interview with Michel Simon, Kubrick said that the photograph suggests that Jack was a reincarnation of an earlier official at the hotel. This has not stopped alternative readings, such as that Jack has been absorbed into the Overlook Hotel. Film critic Jonathan Romney, while acknowledging the absorption theory, wrote, "As the ghostly Butler Grady, Philip Stone, tells him during their chilling confrontation in the men's toilet, 'You're the caretaker, sir. You've always been the caretaker.' Perhaps in some earlier incarnation, Jack really was around in 1921, and it's his present-day self that is a shadow, the phantom photographic copy. But if his picture's been there all along, why has no one noticed it? After all, it's right at the center of the central picture on the wall, and the Torrances have had a painfully drawn-out winter of mind-numbing leisure in which to inspect every corner of the place. Is it just that, like Poe's purloined letter, the thing in plain sight is the last thing you see? When you do see it, the effect is so unsettling because you realize the unthinkable was there under your nose, overlooked the whole time. Screenwriter Todd Alcott has noted, much has been written, some of it quite intelligent, about the spatial anomalies and inconsistencies in The Shining. There are rooms with windows that should not be there and doors that couldn't possibly lead anywhere. Rooms appear to be in one place in one scene, and another place in another. Wall fixtures and furniture pieces appear and disappear from scene to scene. Props move from one room to another, and the layout of the Overlook makes no physical sense. Artist Julie Kearns first identified and created maps of spatial discrepancies in the layout of the Overlook Hotel, the interiors of which were constructed in studios in England. These spatial discrepancies included windows appearing in impossible places, such as in Stuart Ullman's office, which is surrounded by interior hallways, and apartment doorways positioned in places where they cannot possibly lead to apartments. Rob Ager is another proponent of this theory. Jan Harlan, an executive producer on The Shining, was asked about the discontinuity of sets by Zen Brooks of The Guardian and confirmed the discontinuity was intentional. The set was very deliberately built to be offbeat and off the track, so that the huge ballroom would never actually fit inside. The audience is deliberately made not to know where they're going. People say The Shining doesn't make sense. Well spotted. It's a ghost movie. It's not supposed to make sense. Harlan further elaborated to Kate Abbott. Stephen King gave him the go-ahead to change his book, so Stanley agreed and wrote a much more ambiguous script. It's clear instantly there's something foul going on. At the little hotel, everything is like Disney, all kitschwood on the outside, but the interiors don't make sense. Those huge corridors and ballrooms couldn't fit inside. In fact, nothing makes sense. Before making The Shining, Kubrick directed the film Barry Lyndon, 1975, a highly visual period film about an Irishman who attempts to make his way into the European aristocracy. Despite its technical achievements, the film was not a box office success in the United States and was derided by critics for being too long and too slow. Kubrick, disappointed with Barry Lyndon's lack of success, realized he needed to make a film that would be commercially viable as well as artistically fulfilling. Stephen King was told that Kubrick had his staff bring him stacks of horror books as he planted himself in his office to read them all. Kubrick's secretary heard the sound of each book hitting the wall as the director flung it into a reject pile after reading the first few pages. Finally, one day the secretary noticed it had been a while since she had heard the thud of another writer's work biting the dust. She walked in to check on her boss and found Kubrick deeply engrossed in reading a copy of a manuscript of The Shining. Speaking about the theme of the film, Kubrick stated that there's something inherently wrong with the human personality. There's an evil side to it. One of the things that horror stories can do is to show us the archetypes of the unconscious. We can see the dark side without having to confront it directly. Nicholson was Kubrick's first choice for the role of Jack Torrance. Other actors considered included Robert De Niro, who said the film gave him nightmares for a month, Robin Williams, and Harrison Ford, all of whom met with Stephen King's disapproval. Chris Christopherson was Kubrick's backup choice if Nicholson had declined. King, for his part, disavowed Nicholson because he thought that, because of his part in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the viewer would tend to consider him an unstable individual from the beginning. For this reason, King preferred Jon Voight, Michael Moriarty, or Martin Sheen for the role, who would more faithfully represent the profile of the ordinary individual who is gradually driven to madness. In any case, from the beginning the writer was told that the actor for the lead role was not negotiable. Although Nicholson initially suggested that Jessica Lange would be a better fit for the role of Wendy, Shelley Duvall knew early that she was the one cast for the role. Nicholson would work with Lange on his next movie, The Postman Always Rings Twice. Wendy's character in the film differs from the novel, appearing less capable and more vulnerable. Throughout filming, Kubrick pushed Duvall, she said, to get the performance out of me that he wanted. Slim Pickens was offered the role of Dick Halloran, but Pickens remembered his experience of working with Kubrick on Dr. Strangelove and told the director that he would take the role only if his scenes in the film were shot in fewer than 100 takes. Kubrick declined, and Scatman Crothers got the part after he had been suggested by Pickens's agent. The director's initial candidate to play the Torrance's son was Cary Guffey, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but the young actor's parents refused, saying the film was too gruesome for a child. In his search to find the right actor to play Danny, Kubrick sent a husband and wife team, Leon, who portrayed Lord Bullingdon and Barry Lyndon, and Kirstie Vitale, to Chicago, Denver, and Cincinnati to create an interview pool of 5,000 boys over a 6-month period. These cities were chosen since Kubrick was looking for a boy with an accent that fell between Jack Nicholson's and Shelley Duvall's speech patterns, with Nicholson coming from New Jersey and Duvall from Texas. During the filming, the young actor selected, Danny Lloyd, was protected in a special way by Kubrick. The boy believed at all times that he was shooting a drama, not a horror movie. Following his role in the 1982 film G. Gordon Liddy, Lloyd abandoned his acting career. Principal photography began in May 1978 and wrapped in April 1979. It took place mainly in Elstree Studios in southern England. Having chosen King's novel as a basis for his next project, and after a pre-production phase, Kubrick had sets constructed on sound stages at EMI Elstree Studios in Boreham Wood, Hertfordshire, England. Some of the interior designs of the Overlook Hotel set were based on those of the Ahwahnee Hotel in Yosemite National Park. To enable him to shoot the scenes in loose chronological order, he used several stages at EMI Elstree Studios in order to make all sets available during the complete duration of production. The set for the Overlook Hotel was at the time the largest ever built at Elstree, including a life-size recreation of the exterior of the hotel. In February 1979, the Colorado Lounge set at Elstree was badly damaged in a fire, causing a delay in the production. While most of the film was shot on interior sets and the full-scale exterior facade replica at Elstree Studios, a second unit crew headed by Jan Harlan shot some sequences on location in the American West. St. Mary Lake and its Wild Goose Island in Glacier National Park, Montana, were featured in the aerial shots of the opening scenes, with a Volkswagen Beetle driving along Going to the Sun Road. The Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood in Oregon was filmed for a few of the establishing shots of the fictional Overlook Hotel. Absent in these shots is a hedge maze, which the real Timberline Lodge does not have. The Ahwahnee Hotel, the Overlook Hotel's main interior reference, and the Timberline Lodge, the hotel's main exterior, were both designed by architect Gilbert Stanley Underwood in the 1920s and 1930s respectively. Outtakes of the opening panorama shots were later used by Ridley Scott for the closing moments of the original cut of the film Blade Runner 1982. In 1977, a Warner Brothers executive, John Calley, sent Kubrick the proofs of what would become the novel. Its author, Stephen King, was already at that time a best-selling author who, after the blockbuster Carrie, could boast of successes in adaptations for the big screen. For his part, Kubrick had been considering directing a horror film for some time. A few years before, while Barry Lyndon disappointed at the box office, another Warner film he refused to direct, The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin, was breaking box office records around the world. Asked what was that attracted Kubrick to the idea of adapting the novel by the popular writer, a regular on the bestseller list, his executive producer and brother-in-law, Jan Harlan revealed that Kubrick wanted to try in this film genre, although with the condition of being able to change King's novel. And that condition would finally be guaranteed by contract. The script was written by the director himself with the collaboration of novelist Diane Johnson, after being impressed by Johnson's 1974 novel The Shadow Knows. Kubrick had rejected the initial version of the draft, written by King, as too literal an adaptation of the novel. Furthermore, the filmmaker did not believe in ghost stories because that would imply the possibility that there was something after death, and he did not believe there was anything, not even hell. Instead, Johnson, who was teaching a Gothic novel seminar at the University of California at Berkeley at the time, seemed like a better fit for the project. Shortly after the premiere, in an interview with the Parisian magazine Positive, she stated, "Among Us, The Shining, the novel, is not part great literature. It is scary, it is effective, and it works. Without further ado, but it is precisely interesting to see how a very bad book can also be very effective. It's quite pretentious, but it is also true that one has less scruples when destroying it. One is aware that a great work of art is not being destroyed." Kubrick, for his part, was more enthusiastic about the possibilities of the manuscript. "It was the first time that I had read to the end a novel that was sent to me with a view to a possible film adaptation. I was absorbed in its reading, and it seemed to me that its plot, ideas, and structure were much more imaginative than usual in the horror genre. I thought that a great movie could come from there. The Shining had a very prolonged and arduous production period, often with very long work days. Principal photography took over a year to complete, due to Kubrick's highly methodical nature. Actress Shelley Duvall frequently argued with Kubrick on set about lines in the script and her acting techniques. Nicholson was living in London with his then-girlfriend Angelica Houston and her younger sister Allegra, who testified to his long shooting days. Joe Turkel stated in a 2014 interview that they rehearsed the bar scene for 6 weeks and that the shoot day lasted from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m., with Turkel recollecting that his clothes were soaked in perspiration by the end of the day's shoot. He also described it as his favorite scene in the film. For the final Gold Room sequence, Kubrick instructed the extras via megaphone not to talk, but to mime conversation to each other. Kubrick knew from years of scrutinizing thousands of films that extras could often mind their business by nodding and using large gestures that look fake. He told them to act naturally to give the scene a chilling sense of time-tripping realism as Jack walks in the 70s into the roaring 20s. For the international versions of the film, Kubrick shot different takes of Wendy reading the typewriter pages containing "all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy" in different languages. For each language, a suitable idiom was used. German was "Du Hut kannst besorgen, das Verschieb nicht auf morgen / never put off till tomorrow what may be done today." Italian, "Il mattino ha l'oro in bocca / the morning has gold in his mouth." French, "Onions, vot mieux du 2 horas, /1 here you go," is worth more than 2 you'll have it. The equivalent of "a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush." Spanish, "No por mucho madrugar amaneces más temprano / no matter. How early you get up, you can't make the sun rise any sooner." The door that Jack chops through with the axe near the end of the film was real. Kubrick originally shot the scene with a fake door, but Nicholson, who had worked as a volunteer fire marshal and a firefighter in the California Air National Guard, tore through it too quickly. Jack's line, "Here's Johnny," is taken from Ed McMahon's introduction to The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and was improvised by Nicholson. Kubrick, who had lived in England for some time, was unaware of the significance of the line and nearly used a different take. Later that year, Carson would use this clip to open his 18th anniversary show. During production, Kubrick screened David Lynch's Eraserhead, 1977, to the cast and crew to convey the mood he wanted to achieve for the film. The Guinness Book of Records gave the record for the scene with the most retakes in cinematic history to the sequence where Wendy walks backward up the stairs fending off Jack with a baseball bat at 127 times. In July 2020, Guinness updated the record to 148 takes for the scene where Danny and Dick Halloran discuss the ability to shine. In his 2024 book dedicated to The Shining, Leon Critch disputes the 127 takes claim, writing, "It was reported by a crew member who wasn't even on the set when it was shot." The shot that has the most takes in the entire film that no one talks about is the big, long dolly shot that brought Jack and Wendy and the hotel manager into the gold ballroom at the beginning of the movie. The Shining was among the early half-dozen films, after the films Bound for Glory, Marathon Man, and Rocky, all released in 1976, to use the newly developed Steadicam, a stabilizing mount for a motion picture camera, which mechanically separates the operator's movement from the cameras, allowing smooth tracking shots while the operator is moving over an uneven surface. It essentially combines the stabilized steady footage of a regular mount with the fluidity and flexibility of a handheld camera. The inventor of the Steadicam, Garrett Brown, was heavily involved with the production of The Shining. Brown has described his excitement taking his first tour of the sets, which offered further possibilities for the Steadicam. This tour convinced Brown to become personally involved with the production. Kubrick was not just talking of stunt shots and staircases. Rather, he would use the Steadicam, as it was intended to be used, as a tool which can help get the lens where it's wanted in space and time without the classic limitations of the dolly and crane. Brown used an 18mm Cooke lens that allowed the Steadicam to pass within an inch of walls and door frames. Brown published an article in American Cinematographer about his experience and contributed to the audio commentary on the 2007 DVD release. Kubrick personally aided in modifying the Steadicam's video transmission technology. Brown states his own abilities to operate the Steadicam were refined by working on Kubrick's film. For this film, Brown developed a two-handed technique, which enabled him to maintain the camera at one height while panning and tilting the camera. In addition to tracking shots from behind, the Steadicam enabled shooting in constricted rooms without flying out walls or backing the camera into doors. Brown notes that one of the most talked about shots in the picture is the eerie tracking sequence which follows Danny as he pedals at high speed through corridor after corridor on his plastic big wheel tricycle. The soundtrack explodes with noise when the wheel is on wooden flooring and is abruptly silent as it crosses over carpet. We need to have the lens just a few inches from the floor and to travel rapidly just behind or ahead of the bike. This required the Steadicam to be on a special mount resembling a wheelchair in which the operator sat while pulling a platform with the sound man. The weight of the rig and its occupants proved to be too much for the original tires, resulting in a blowout one day that almost caused a serious crash. Solid tires were then mounted on the rig. Kubrick also had a highly accurate speedometer mounted on the rig, so as to duplicate the exact tempo of a given shot, so that Brown could perform successive identical takes. Brown also discusses how the scenes in the hedge maze were shot with a Steadicam. The stylistically modernist art music chosen by Kubrick is similar to the repertoire he first explored in 2001, A Space Odyssey. Although the repertoire was selected by Kubrick, the process of matching passages of music to motion picture was left almost entirely at the discretion of music editor Gordon Stainforth, whose work on this film is known for attention to fine details and remarkably precise synchronization without excessive splicing. The soundtrack album on LP was withdrawn due to problems with licensing of the music. The LP soundtrack omits some pieces heard in the film and also includes complete versions of pieces, of which only fragments are heard in the film. The non-original music on the soundtrack is as follows: Dies Irae segment from Symphonie Fantastique by Hector Berlioz, performed by Wendy Carlos and Rachel O'Kind. Lontano by Giorgi Ligeti, Ernest Bohr conducting the Southwest German Radio Symphony Orchestra, Wergo Records. Music for strings, percussion, and celesta by Bela Bartok, Herbert von Karajan conducting the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, Deutsche Grammophon. Utrenja, excerpts from the Euangelia, and Canon Pasquini 2 movements by Krzysztof Penderecki, Andrzej Markowski, conducting the Warsaw National Philharmonic Orchestra, Polskie Nagrania Records. The Awakening of Jacob, the Natura Sonoris No. 1, the latter not on the soundtrack album, Krakow Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Henry Chiz, and the Natura Sonoris No. 2 by Krzysztof Penderecki, Warsaw National Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Andrzej Markowski, Polskie Nagrania Records. Home, performed by Henry Hall and the Gleneagles Hotel Band, by permission of Decca Record Company. Remastered by Keith Gooden and Jeff Milne, 1977. Decca DDV 5001/2. Midnight, The Stars and You by Harry M. Woods, Jimmy Campbell, and Reg Connolly, performed by Ray Noble and his orchestra, vocalist Al Bowley. Segments that did not appear on the soundtrack album also include It's All Forgotten Now by Ray Noble, performed by Noble and his orchestra. Masquerade, performed by Jack Hilton and his orchestra. Canon, for string orchestra, by Krzysztof Penderecki. Polymorphia, for string orchestra, by Krzysztof Penderecki, Krakow Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Henry Chiz. Upon their arrival at Elstree Studios, Wendy Carlos and Rachel O'Kind were shown the first version of the film by Kubrick. The film was a little on the long side, There were great gobs of scenes that never made it to the film. There was a whole strange and mystical scene in which Jack Nicholson discovers objects that have been arranged in his working space in the ballroom with arrows and things. He walks down and thinks he hears a voice, and a ghost throws a ball back to him. None of that made it to the final film. We scored a lot of those. We didn't know what was going to be used for sure. After having something similar happen to her on A Clockwork Orange, Carlos has said that she was so disillusioned by Kubrick's actions that she vowed never to work with him again. She and O'Kind had considered legal action against Kubrick, but because no formal contract was in place, they reluctantly accepted the situation. Carlos's own music was released in its near entirety in 2005 as part of her Rediscovering Lost Scores compilation. Release. Unlike Kubrick's previous works, which developed audiences gradually through word of mouth, The Shining initially opened on 10 screens in New York City and Los Angeles on Memorial Day weekend, then was released as a mass-market film nationwide. Within a month, the European release of The Shining a few months later was 25 minutes shorter, due to Kubrick's removal of most of the scenes taking place outside the environs of the hotel. After its premiere and a week into the general run, with a running time of 146 minutes, Kubrick cut a scene at the end that took place in a hospital. The scene shows Wendy in a bed talking with Mr. Ullman, who explains that Jack's body cannot be found. He then gives Danny a yellow tennis ball, presumably the same one that Jack was throwing around the hotel. This scene was subsequently physically cut out of prints by projectionists and sent back to the studio by order Warner Brothers, the film's distributor. This cut the film's running time to 144 minutes. Roger Ebert commented, "If Jack did indeed freeze to death in the labyrinth, of course his body was found, and sooner rather than later, since Dick Halloran alerted the Forest Rangers to serious trouble at the hotel. If Jack's body was not found, what happened to it? Was it never there? Was it absorbed into the past? And does that explain Jack's presence in that final photograph of a group of hotel party-goers in 1921? Did Jack's violent pursuit of his wife and child exist entirely in Wendy's imagination, or Danny's, or theirs?" Kubrick was wise to remove that epilogue. It pulled one rug too many out from under the story. At some level, it is necessary for us to believe the 3 members of the Torrance family are actually residents in the hotel during that winter, whatever happens, or whatever they think happens. The general consensus among those who saw the first few shows was that the film was better without it because keeping it would weaken the Overlook's threat to the family and reintroduce Ullman, who had barely had a leading role in the story, into the conflict. Co-writer Diane Johnson revealed that Kubrick had a certain compassion from the beginning for the fate of Wendy and Danny, and in that sense the hospital scene would give a sense of a return to normality. Johnson, on the other hand, was in favor of a more tragic outcome. She proposed the death of Danny Torrance. For Shelley Duvall, Kubrick was wrong because the scene explained some important things, such as the meaning of the yellow ball and the role that the hotel manager played in the intrigue. Kubrick decided that the film worked better without the scene for its release in Europe. Kubrick cut about 25 minutes from the film. The excised scenes included a longer meeting between Jack and Watson at the hotel, Danny being attended by a doctor, and Jackson, including references to Tony and how Jack once injured Danny in a drunken rage. More footage of Halloran's attempts to get to the hotel during the snowstorm, including a sequence with garage attendant Tony Burton, extended dialogue scenes at the hotel, and a scene where Wendy discovers a group of skeletons in the hotel lobby during the climax. Jackson and Burton are credited in the European print, despite their scenes having been excised from the movie. According to Harlan, Kubrick decided to cut some sequences because the film was not very well received, and also after Warner Brothers had complained about its ambiguity and length. The scene when Jack writes obsessively on a typewriter, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," was reshot a number of times, but changing the language of the typed copy to Italian, French, Spanish, and German in order to match the respective dub languages. 3 alternative takes were used in a British television commercial. The U.S. network television premiere of The Shining on the ABC Friday night movie of May 6, 1983, started with a placard saying, "Tonight's film deals with the supernatural as a possessed man attempts to destroy his family." With the movie's ambiguities, it is not known how Kubrick felt about or if he agreed with this proclamation. The placard also said that the film was edited for television and warned about the content. The Shining was released on VHS and Betamax in 1981, following its theatrical run, and on Laserdisc in 1990. The film was released on DVD in 1999, featuring a 4:3 open matte aspect ratio and a 5.1 audio track upmix from the original mono soundtrack. The DVD also contains a candid fly-on-the-wall 33-minute documentary made by Kubrick's daughter Vivian, who was 17 when she filmed it, entitled Making the Shining, originally shown on British television in 1980. She also provided an audio commentary track about her documentary for its DVD release. It appears even on pre-2007 editions of The Shining on DVD, although most DVDs of Kubrick films before then were devoid of documentaries or audio commentaries. It has some candid interviews and very private moments caught on set, such as arguments with cast and director, moments of a no-nonsense Kubrick directing his actors, Scatman Crothers being overwhelmed with emotion during his interview, Shelley Duvall collapsing from exhaustion on the set, and Jack Nicholson enjoying playing up to behind-the-scenes camera. The film was released on Blu-ray in 2007 in a 1.85:1 aspect ratio. It was released on Ultra HD Blu-ray and a remastered Blu-ray in October 2019. The release includes a 4K remaster using a scan of the original 35mm negative. Filmmaker Steven Spielberg and Kubrick's former personal assistant Leon Vitali closely assisted Warner Brothers in the mastering process. This is the same cut and 4K restoration that was screened at the 2019 Cannes Film Festival. According to the official press release, the official full-length runtime is 146 minutes. In 2024, the Stanley Kubrick Film Archive released a short documentary Shine On, the forgotten Shining location, on the official Stanley Kubrick YouTube channel. Narrated by Michael Sheen and directed by Paul King, the film looks at how Kubrick took over Elstree Studios for a whole year whilst The Shining. Executive producer Jan Harlan, art director Les Tompkins, and Kubrick's daughter Katerina Kubrick, assigned the role of locations researcher on the film, revisit the studio locations, and share their memories about a film. Film critic Owen Gleiberman wrote in Variety, Shine On is a featurette that devotes itself to the physical production of The Shining, that is, to the film sets, a few of which, in the form of industrial rooms that were doubling as movie locations, still exist. So Shine On is a movie about the shell of The Shining. But that shell is really the most unnerving thing about The Shining. Turner Classic Movies and Fathom Events had a limited screening in October 2016 in 2K and 4K resolution, 140. In April 2019, a 4K resolution remastered version from a new scan of the original 35mm camera negative of the film was selected to be shown in the Cannes Classics section at the 2019 Cannes Film Festival. The length is listed as 146 minutes and 143 minutes. The Shining opened on the same weekend as The Empire Strikes Back, but was released on 10 screens and grossed $622,337 for the 4-day weekend, the third highest grossing opening weekend from fewer than 50 screens of all time, behind Star Wars, 1977, and The Rose, 1979. It had a per-screen average gross of $62,234, compared to $50,919 for The Empire Strikes Back from 126 screens. The film had mixed reviews at the time of its opening in the United States. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of C+ on an A+ to F scale. Janet Maslin of the New York Times lauded Nicholson's performance and praised the Overlook Hotel as an effective setting for horror, but wrote that the supernatural story knows frustratingly little rhyme or reason. Even the film's most startling horrific images seem overbearing and perhaps even irrelevant. Variety was critical, stating, with everything to work with, Kubrick has teamed with Jumpy Jack Nicholson to destroy all that was so terrifying about Stephen King's bestseller. A common initial criticism was the slow pacing, which was highly atypical of horror films of the time. Neither Gene Siskel nor Roger Ebert reviewed the film on their television show Sneak Previews when it was first released, but in his review for the Chicago Sun-Times, Ebert complained that it was hard to connect with any of the characters. In his Chicago Tribune review, Siskel gave the film 2 stars out of 4 and called it a crashing disappointment. The biggest surprise is that it contains virtually no thrills. Given Kubrick's world-class reputation, one's immediate reaction is that maybe he was after something other than thrills in the film. If so, it's hard to figure out what. Vincent Misiano's review in Aries magazine concluded, "The Shining lays open to view all the devices of horror and suspense. Endless eerie music, odd camera angles, a soundtrack of interminably pounding heart, hatchets and hunts. The result is shallow, self-conscious and dull. Read the book." Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times wrote, "There are moments so visually stunning only a Kubrick could pull them off. Yet the film is too grandiose to be the jolter that horror pictures are expected to be." Both those expecting significance from Kubrick and those merely looking for a good scare may be equally disappointed. Pauline Kael of The New Yorker stated, again and again, "The movie leads us to expect something, almost promises it, and then disappoints us." Gary Arnold of The Washington Post wrote, "Stanley Kubrick's production of The Shining, a ponderous, lackluster distillation of Stephen King's best-selling novel, looms as the big letdown of the new film season. I can't recall a more elaborately ineffective scare movie." Stanley Kaufman of The New Republic described The Shining as laborious filmmaking and a grab bag of spook stuff, with no rhyme or reason of its own, and that Nicholson's mouthy work here makes the late Bela Lugosi look conservative. It was one of two films of Kubrick's last 11 films, the other being Eyes Wide Shut, to receive no nominations from the BAFTAs. It was the only one of Kubrick's last 9 films to receive no nominations from either the Oscars or Golden Globes. Instead, it was Kubrick's only film to be nominated at the Razzie Awards, including Worst Director and Worst Actress Duvall, in the first year that award was given. These nominations, especially Duvall's, have provoked backlash and controversy for years, with Razzie's founder John J.B. Wilson defending his choice, claiming he expected the adaptation to be more similar to the book. Razzie's co-founder Maureen Murphy stated in 2022 that she regretted giving Duvall the Worst Actress nomination. On March 31st, 2022, the Razzie Committee officially rescinded Duvall's nomination, stating, "We have since discovered that Duvall's performance was impacted by Stanley Kubrick's treatment of her throughout the production." Stephen King has been quoted as saying that although Kubrick made a film with memorable imagery, it was poor as an adaptation, and that it is the only adaptation of his novels that he could remember hating. In his 1981 nonfiction book, Danse Macabre, he noted that Kubrick was among those filmmakers whose particular visions are so clear and fierce that fear of failure never becomes a factor in the equation, commenting that even when a director such as Stanley Kubrick makes such a maddening, perverse, and disappointing film as The Shining, it somehow retains a brilliance that is inarguable. It is simply there. And listed Kubrick's film among those he considered to have contributed something, of value to the horror genre, before the 1980 film. King often said he gave little attention to the film adaptations of his work. The novel, written while King was suffering from alcoholism, contains an autobiographical element. King expressed disappointment that some themes, such as the disintegration of family and the dangers of alcoholism, are less present in the film. King also viewed the casting of Nicholson as a mistake, arguing it would result in a rapid realization among audiences that Jack would go insane due to Nicholson's famous role as Randall McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975. King had suggested that a more everyman actor such as Jon Voight, Christopher Reeve, or Michael Moriarty play the role, so that Jack's descent into madness would be more unnerving. In the novel, the story takes the child's point of view, while in the film the father is the main character. In fact, one of the most notable differences lies in Jack Torrance's psychological profile. According to the novel, the character represented an ordinary and balanced man who little by little loses control. Furthermore, the written narration reflected personal traits of the author himself at that time, marked by insomnia and alcoholism, in addition to abuse. There is some allusion to these episodes in the American version of the film. In an interview with the BBC, King criticized Kubrick's Wendy, stating that she is basically just there to scream and be stupid, and that's not the woman that I wrote about. King's Wendy is a strong and independent woman on a professional and emotional level. To Kubrick, on the other hand, it did not seem consistent that such a woman had long endured the personality of Jack Torrance. King once suggested that he disliked the film's downplaying of the supernatural, King had envisioned Jack as a victim of the genuinely external forces haunting the hotel, whereas King felt Kubrick had viewed the haunting and its resulting malignancy as coming from within Jack himself. In October 2013, journalist Laura Miller wrote that the discrepancy between the two was almost complete opposite. King is, essentially, a novelist of morality. The decisions his characters make, whether it's to confront a pack of vampires or break 10 years of sobriety, are what matter to him. But in Kubrick's The Shining, the characters are largely in the grip of forces beyond their control. It's a film in which domestic violence occurs, while King's novel is about domestic violence as a choice certain men make when they refuse to abandon a delusional, defensive entitlement. As King sees it, Kubrick treats his characters like insects because the director doesn't really consider them capable of shaping their own fates. Everything they do is subordinate to an overweening, irresistible force, which is Kubrick's highly developed aesthetic. They are its slaves. In King's The Shining, the monster is Jack. In Kubrick's, the monster is Kubrick. King later criticized the film and Kubrick as a director. Parts of the film are chilling, charged with a relentlessly claustrophobic terror, but others fall flat. Not that religion has to be involved in horror, but a visceral skeptic such as Kubrick just couldn't grasp the sheer inhuman evil of the Overlook Hotel. So he looked, instead, for evil in the characters and made the film into a domestic tragedy with only vaguely supernatural overtones. That was the basic flaw. Because he couldn't make the film believable to others. What's basically wrong with Kubrick's version of The Shining is that it's a film by a man who thinks too much and feels too little. And that's why, for all its virtuoso effects, it never gets you by the throat and hangs on the way real horror should. King was disappointed by Kubrick's decision not to film at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, which inspired the story, a decision Kubrick made since the hotel lacks sufficient snow and electricity. He supervised a 1997 television adaptation, also titled The Shining, filmed at the Stanley Hotel. During an interview segment on the Bravo channel, King stated that the first time he watched Kubrick's adaptation, he found it to be dreadfully unsettling. Writing in the afterword of Dr. Sleep, King said the film, of course there was Stanley Kubrick's movie, which many seem to remember, for reasons I have never quite understood, as one of the scariest films they have ever seen. If you have seen the movie but not read the novel, you should note that Dr. Sleep follows the latter, which is, in my opinion, the true history of the Torrance family. Mike Flanagan, director of the film adaptation of Dr. Sleep, would reconcile the differences between novel and film versions of The Shining there. Dr. Sleep is a direct adaptation of its novel counterpart, which itself is a sequel to the novel version of The Shining, but is also a continuation of Kubrick's film. In explaining the latter, Flanagan expressed, The Shining is so ubiquitous and has burned itself into the collective imagination of people who love cinema in a way that so few movies have. There's no other language to tell that story in. If you say, Overlook Hotel, I see something. It lives right up in my brain because of Stanley Kubrick. You can't pretend that isn't the case. King initially rejected Flanagan's pitch of bringing back the Overlook as seen in Kubrick's film, but changed his mind after Flanagan pitched a scene within a hotel near the end of the film that served as his reason to bring back the Overlook. Upon reading the script, King was so satisfied with the result that he said, "Everything that I ever disliked about the Kubrick version of The Shining is redeemed for me here." Well, that was another Remember That show, Movie Week. There was so much I had to cut out to make it a decent length, but if you want to see the full version, it will be coming out as a members-only video. Anyways, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, keep on collecting. Bye.